Waiting to see who it connects with. Facebook has accepted the stream. YouTube has accepted the stream.
Yay.
Twitch has accepted the stream. Are you ready to start your show?
I am ready.
Okay, when the timer says on the air, you're on the air.
Hello, Think Twice Radio, and welcome to an episode of Austin Audits, where I'll be auditing Buffalo City Hall. Hi, I'm Matthew, and I guess this has formerly been known as the Doge Show, and I'm still a fan of Doge, but I think the more things go on at the national level, the more there's room for confusion. So we're modifying the logo to be just a sheepdog over the stars, the stars and lightning bolts of City Hall. We're still about Doge dogs and memes, but to get confusion. So today we're gonna have three real main topics of today's show. We're gonna talk about the Kensington Expressway. So on Friday, a judge made a ruling, so we'll do a deep dive into the judge's ruling and all the ramifications of what that means for the state's Kensington Expressway project. Then we'll be talking a little bit about the Bray Market, which is a downtown grocery store in the city of Buffalo that's being proposed to be turned into a new police station. So we'll be doing a deep dive into that issue because I think it's kind of one of the most important emerging issues in the city of Buffalo. And then I'll talk a little bit about tomorrow's Common Council meeting. We'll go through the agenda to see if there's any major items on the docket. And if we have time at the end, maybe talk about some of the FOIL requests. I've got some responses for City Hall and maybe some time for a little bit of Buffalo Bills analysis with the Super Bowl result of yesterday and maybe looking forward now to next season. So let's get started. So welcome to the show for those of you that maybe have never seen my shows. I am a former City Hall employee. I was terminated, and now I kind of do this City Hall auditing show where there's a lot to take in. And I think, I'm going to be talking about a lot about City Hall issues and giving a little analysis on some of the emerging issues. And I think I'm going to start maybe slowly pivoting my show towards more kind of deeper dive and more kind of analysis and kind of rewinds and kind of just deeper analysis of some of the things going on. I think I've done a past couple shows, and those are on the Think Twice show where I usually just go through the agenda. And I think it's important. I'll still incorporate that, but starting to lean a little away maybe from like the day-to-day operations of City Hall and Common Council. Maybe start on focusing on some of the issues that need further auditing. So, for example, the American Rescue Plan, some data miner stuff. But let's get started. I think the biggest thing that happened this week, or since last show, on Friday, Judge Koliakovo, the Honorable Koliakovo, essentially the judge. So we've had a state judge make his decision. This has been a long time coming. So a judge has made a ruling on the state's Kensington Expressway project. And essentially, the judge made the decision that the state cannot proceed with their Kensington Expressway project without a full environmental impact statement. So that ruling came out Friday. That's kind of the big headline. And just for full disclosure, I'm a member of the Eastside Parkways Coalition, which is the group of residents, city residents that are opposing the state's issue. And I think it's really the legal verdict we were all hoping for. And I think we were all optimistic and very optimistic that the judge was going to rule in our favor. But again, until the judge makes his ruling, you really don't know. And I think the past maybe month or so, we were looking at a 90-day window. And the past month or so had gone over that 90 days. So I know myself personally was going into a lot of my tin hatter conspiracies of, wait, why did he miss his deadline? What does this mean? And it ended up being, I'm not sure why it took him longer, but the judge kind of can take as long as he wants. But essentially, he ruled that the state was not compliant with their own regulations. So I think for a time here, I wanted to actually read through the lawsuit. So I've perused it and browsed it, but I think it's really important. A lot of the media, too, they kind of just talk about major decisions. I think that's the biggest one, but I think it's important just to actually read. It's not that comprehensive. So let's switch over. I'm going to pull up the lawsuit that the judge ruled, and this is right hot off the presses. So this is, let's see how this looks. So this is the lawsuit or the memorandum decision. I'm learning my legal jargon and legal things, but this is the judge's rendering. So this is what you'll see reported in the news. Richard, it looks like it might have froze. Oh, we're still on. So we have the East Side Parkways Coalition and the plaintiffs versus the New York State Department of Transportation. There was also another lawsuit in here, which we'll cover. But essentially, to summarize, this was one lawsuit. This was really 5 lawsuits that were all related to this project. And all kind of got grouped into a single hearing where all the lawyers debated. So there's kind of multiple different lawsuits, they got kind of grouped in together because they were all related to the same issue. And we have multiple decisions here. So let's go through this actual document. The first one we had was a city resident named Terrence Robinson. He actually filed his own Article 78 lawsuit against the New York State DOT. So really, it was impressive. I mean, I know Terry Robinson personally as a member of the East Side Parkways Coalition. He's not a lawyer, although he's very well versed on the law. But essentially, what you had here was an actual resident that lives on Humboldt brought forward his own lawsuit by himself against the state DOT. So I think that one really got dismissed, and essentially, I want to make sure I'm reading the right one here. My spin wheel is a little off here, but so essentially that one got removed because Terry Robinson or Robinson, he brought on his behalf an Article 78 proceeding challenging the determinations made by the state in its capacity as lead agent. In his petition, Robinson alleges that the respondents violated the New York State Constitution and SEQR by not declaring the proposed Kensington Expressway project as a Type 1 action, by issuing negative declarations and failing to make the necessary hard look that is otherwise contemplated by the ES. I want to see if I missed the climate one up here. So essentially the Robinson lawsuit, it got dismissed. Essentially, it said that he missed a deadline, and then, essentially got it dismissed. I'm not sure. Let's see here. And then another lawsuit that came forward was the public trust doctrine. So this was a lawsuit really focused on the original construction of the Kensington Expressway, really looking at, did the state have the right to take the Kensington Expressway land in the first place? Did they not violate the procedures? So this was really, I guess there's some law that you couldn't really take a park to build a lawsuit, and it really gets, essentially this lawsuit gets into the nuance of a parkway versus a park. So let's go through that one a little bit. Although more fully explained in the court's November 15th, 2024 memorandum decision, which is incorporated by reference herein, petitioners contend that the Humboldt Parkway was parkland when the Kensington Expressway displaced it. According to petitioners, because it was a parkland, the state erred and acted contrary to law when the commissioner, also referred to as superintendent of public works, directed that a portion of the parkland to be repurposed as an expressway. Petitioners insist that the legislature did not confer this authority to the commissioner to alienate parkland for non-park use. See Memorandum of Law. Respondent Department of Transportation asserts that Humboldt Parkway was never a park or parkland, but was always a public street. Respondent insists that parkways are not covered by the public trust doctrine. Because the public trust doctrine does not apply, respondents maintain the petition must be dismissed. So this is an interesting sentence here that says the respondent, the DOT asserts that Humboldt Parkway was never a park or parkland, but was always a public street. So this is, again, where we get into the nuance here of, right, I think Humboldt Parkway originally, right, to the common person, it was a park. But because of the term parkway and the legal and technical definitions of that, especially what Olmsted, it was considered a public street. So this is really getting into the nuance of, and this is really, I think, a lawyer's favorite of really getting into the minutia of parks versus parklands. So as this court noted in its initial decision, for decades the courts have weighed in on this definitional dispute. The Court of Appeals wrote that the terms park and parkway are not synonymous. While each may include certain common features of ornamentation or recreation, the respective definitions of the two words as a whole are clearly distinguishable. The Kupalian Court noted further that the essential and decisive facts is that a parkway exists when we have a single entire street of which a part is devoted to ordinary purposes of travel and a part to ornamental or recreation purposes. The two portions together constitute a single entire way, which is some of the characteristics of a park. In other words, a parkway is a thoroughfare for vehicular traffic, little different from any street, highway, thruway, or expressway, except for the added accessory of ornamental landscaping. So it's interesting because, right when in Olmsted's original park, when he was designing the parkway, there was no vehicles, right? So the idea that Humboldt Parkway was built for, right, purposely for purposes of travel is kind of interesting because, right there, it was designed before vehicles. So I think the lawyers for ESP think that, you know, they could appeal it, but we'll see what happens with this one. So essentially this lawsuit around the definitions of parks or parkway, I think this one also got dismissed. So it closes by saying, because Humboldt Parkway was a roadway and since the legislature properly enacted a statute creating the Kensington Expressway, there can be no violation of the public trust doctrine. Inasmuch as petitioners do not have a viable cause of action, respondent's motion to dismiss the cause of action is hereby granted. So again, this word of, because Humboldt Parkway was a roadway, I think members of the East Side Parkways Coalition, we kind of dispute that it was a roadway. And I think this one exists just as a common folk. I don't have my law degree, but it does seem very legalese. And I think, right, a lawyer probably could argue, but at this point, right, it's been decades since this was built. So I don't know kind of hopefully, right, it's interesting that maybe it wasn't taken, but I think it's just a matter of lawyers fighting over the actual, you know, definitions of parks and parkways. And it's interesting because I don't know if we would win what restitution could be made because it's kind of already been done. Then the climate proceeding. This one's interesting because it actually didn't get dismissed. So yeah, this climate lawsuit did not get dismissed, and I think it's very interesting because I think the New York State's climate law is so new that we weren't sure when I wasn't sure when this lawsuit was coming forward. If right, there's just no case law, and there's no really examples that a judge could point to enforce it. So since it's so early, since New York State climate laws this is really could be a precedent-setting case. So let's dive in to this one. So climate proceeding. So as previously noted in its memorandum decision, the state enacted the Green Amendment so that each person shall have a right to clean air, water, and a healthful environment. New York Constitution, Article 1, Section 19, as the respondent note in their memorandum of law, to establish a violation of the Green Amendment, a party must show, based on established science, that a government action will significantly contribute to unclean air, unclean water, or an unhealthful environment. Respondents contend that petitioners have failed to demonstrate a violation of Green Amendment and Climate Act that will hasten climate change. They contend that petitioners make no fact-specific allegations, but instead rely on general conclusions. While respondents concede that the project will increase greenhouse gas emissions, the state maintains that it will not significantly contribute to climate change. In fact, respondents go so far as to allege that, notwithstanding the construction emissions that are likely to occur, the project, over its lifespan, will decrease emissions. Though their own arguments are unsupported, respondents contend that petitioners' arguments are speculative. Petitioners counter that more than almost 2,700 metric tons of carbon dioxide will be released into the atmosphere from this project. The court concedes that petitioners must allege something more than generalized concerns to survive a CPLR 3211 motion to dismiss. See matters Save Our Main Street Buildings versus Greene County Legislator. While the court previously expressed concerns about the viability of petitioners' claim, upon further review, petitioners set forth convincing allegations that this project will affect the disadvantaged community around the construction site. While proximity alone is insufficient to raise an environmental challenge, by virtue of petitioners' members' proximity to the project, the increase in emissions will affect them differently than other members of the public, thus conferring standing under the specific facts of the case. The CLCPA mandates agencies consider the impact on the environment and disadvantaged communities. The record before the court shows that greenhouse gases and other construction emissions will increase as a result of the project. While both sides dispute the veracity of the other studies and statistics, the court finds that there are questions of fact whether respondents adequately considered the environmental impacts of this project. In addition, the court finds respondents' claim that somehow and at some time this project will reduce emissions debatable. Inasmuch as petitioners have identified a cognizable cause of action and have asserted material allegations to support it, the court hereby denies respondents' motion to dismiss the climate proceedings petition. So I think this lawsuit, the climate lawsuit, it's going to get lost in the headlines, right? The kind of the mainstream headlines, because obviously the EIS case, which we're about to read, is kind of the big headline. But I think this climate decision has really long-term implications. I think I know, just as someone somewhat familiar with law but not a lawyer, in just hearing the arguments in court, you weren't sure how. It just felt like this one might be easy to dismiss just again because the New York State climate law is so relatively new that there's, again, no case law and there's really no precedent for it. But I think the state DOT is most definitely going to appeal that decision. But I think just it feels like a major win, the fact that the judge denied the dismissal of that lawsuit. I think that case has an opportunity to be really one of the first, if not the first, legal cases supporting New York State's climate action law. So it's really, I think, promising, especially for New York State residents that care about the environment and care about clean water, clean air, and healthy environments. The fact that that case did not get dismissed feels like a win. I don't think the judge could render. And again, I think the reason he kind of didn't dismiss it was because ultimately a higher court in New York State will probably hear it and make a decision. But I do want to just give credit where credit's due to the lawyers on that case. And again, I think it was the Western New York Youth Climate Coalition who brought it forward, but really has the chance. I know in New York State specifically, it's really the first lawsuit that I'm aware of that, especially of a project of this scale, to really see how much teeth the New York State climate law has. And I think it's very promising from that end, and it has a really chance to set precedent in New York State. And I'm not sure when you think of nationally or internationally climate law, I'm just not familiar, but I wouldn't see why maybe this case has a chance to maybe be some sort of national or international standard, because it's very promising that it wasn't dismissed, or that it was, they denied the motion to dismiss. So those are the first couple. There was the Terry Robinson lawsuit, the Park versus Parkway, public interest, and then the climate action. And then the next one here that I'm going to cover is the EIS proceedings. This one is obviously the one you'll hear about in the news. This is the one that's, I don't want to say them, they're all important, but this one is the one that's most timely, and it's the big kahuna. If this is the Super Bowl of the lawsuits. This is the EIS. This is really the big one, the one that we've all been waiting for. So let's dive into the EIS proceeding here. Okay, so we have EIS proceedings. The court previously granted petitioner's request for a preliminary injunction in the EIS proceedings. In its decision, the court held, though this decision does not rule on the ultimate merits of the petition, when considering the request of the preliminary injunction. Again, this preliminary injunction was really back a few months ago when these lawsuits came. Essentially, the court essentially put a pause on things at the request of the petitioners, put a pause on current developments, said, hey, there's something here, the court needs to make a decision before this could proceed. So the preliminary injunction is this event that the court put in, I think it was back in late October or November, that essentially put a pause on things until the court made this decision. So the petitioners have demonstrated a likelihood of success on the merits. The court finds that the state failed to give due consideration to pertinent environmental factors. The record thus far illustrates the respondents did not do an appropriate hard look, and that their decision was irrational and not supported by substantial evidence. Further, petitioners have demonstrated irreparable harm that would result if this project began without an EIS. So, as such, it naturally follows that the court would not have granted a preliminary injunction had petitioners not shown a likelihood of success on the merits. While respondents moved to dismiss on the basis that petitioners have failed to assert material allegations to support their cause of action, the court cannot entertain such relief based on the record before it. In Section 3 of its memorandum decision, the court thoroughly detailed the facts in the law concerning the EIS issue. The court incorporates that analysis herein. However, in summary, the court found that the aforementioned project had numerous potential adverse impacts. Further, it found that the state did not do the necessary hard look, and that given the low threshold to require an EIS, the state missed the mark in failing to do so here. The EIS is the only instrument that would provide a fair and impartial analysis of all the considerable environmental impacts, fully evaluate all alternatives, and mitigate any of the eventual effects that are bound to occur. As the court noted during oral arguments, one cannot build a Tim Hortons in Western New York without performing an EIS and having the proper SECRA classification. Why the state thought it could simply entertain a project of this magnitude and not comply with what it otherwise orders others to perform remains a mystery. Nevertheless, the court finds that petitioners did state a viable cause of action and provided material allegations in support upon which to base their petition. As such, because the court has already found that petitioners are likely to prevail on the merits, the court has not seen nor reviewed anything that would otherwise change its mind. As such, the respondent's motion is hereby denied. Because this matter is fully briefed, argued, and the court is in possession of the records from the respondents, the court is in a position to decide the actual merits of the petition. An agency determination will be annulled only if it is arbitrary, capricious, or unsupported by the evidence. Matters of Van Dyke versus Town of Greenfield Planning Board, matter of Riverkeeper Inc. versus Planning Board of the Town of Southeast, and matter of Kyle versus Greenway Heritage Conservancy for the Hudson River Valley. The court understands its role is not to second-guess the agency determination, but instead is tasked with reviewing the record to determine whether the lead agency identified the relevant areas of environmental concern, took a hard look at them, and made a reasoned elaboration of the basis for its determination. Matter of Adirondack Historical Association versus Village of Lake Placid. And the matter of Brunner versus the Town of Shodak Planning Board. A determination should be annulled only if it is arbitrary, capricious, or unsupported by the evidence. Matters of Heights of Lansing LLC versus Village of Lansing. And quoting matter of Riverkeeper Inc. versus Planning Board of Town of Southeast. Here, the record supports the conclusion that the determination reached was arbitrary, capricious, and unsupported by the evidence. Judge Eugene Fahey's 1999 decision in City of Buffalo versus New York State Department of Environmental Conservation is instructive here. In that case, which dealt with the construction of the Signature Span Bridge, the City of Buffalo forewent the more comprehensive EIS and conducted only an environmental assessment, which is briefer and used only when projects are not likely to have significant effects. The city found that an EIS was not necessary in light of their hard look. In his decision, Judge Fahey noted, "The proposed project is the largest construction project in recent Western New York history. In terms of total dollars, it may be the most expensive ever. Can the court accept what a project of this magnitude will not have a significant environmental impact?" Judge Fahey concluded that the failure to look at the cumulative impact, as required in Save the Pine Bush, SUPRA, I'm not sure what that means, required the negative declaration to be vacated. Most importantly, Judge Fahey queried, "How can the court accept that a project of this magnitude not have a significant environmental impact?" This court has the same reservations. In elaborating on his decision, Judge Fahey noted the failure to consider cumulative impact of a project constituted a violation of the department's obligation to take a hard look under SECRA. Therefore, the determination of no non-significance was arbitrary and capricious. Here, the court reaches the same conclusion. The failure of respondents to take a hard look and perform the EIS was improper. Therefore, the determination to proceed with its negative declaration was arbitrary and capricious. Or is it capricious? An EA, or environmental assessment, is not an adequate substitute for the more thorough analysis otherwise contained in an EIS. It is a shortcut designed to avoid the hard analysis that is necessary in light of a project of this scale. As this court noted in its memorandum decision, in what is anticipated to be this community's largest, most expensive, most disruptive, and intensive construction project, it is baffling how the state, which portrays itself as the guardian of the environment, cut corners and ignored rules that any other developer would be required to adhere to. The court's position remains unchanged. Here, the record demonstrates that the project will, among other things, replace age-old bridges, create an almost mile-long tunnel, excavate subsurface areas that will invade the local water table, and drill and blast existing roadways to make way for new parkways and roadways in an area that is a major traffic artery for the greater Buffalo area. The effects to the surrounding community from all of this are incalculable. Yet, the respondents simply argue that any disruption in environmental effects would be minimal. This is fortuitously convenient for the state, as it appears willing to push this project, while at the same time ignoring well-understood SECRA guidelines that require an impartial analysis to determine the full range of potential significant adverse environmental impacts. The residents of these affected areas deserve better. In light of the emissions and health effects associated with this project as demonstrated by the record, especially in light of what this affected area has already sustained, the respondents should have prepared an EIS. There is no question that this project will have at least one significant environmental effect. As the second department noted in Uprose versus Power Authority, because the operative word triggering the requirement of an EIS is may, there is a relatively low threshold for the preparation of an EIS. No rational person can conclude, based on the record before this court, that this project would not have an adverse impact on the affected community. To think otherwise simply overlooks the uncontroverted facts in the record before this court. In light of the undisputed potential adverse health effects that will occur from the greenhouse gas emissions, traffic, blasting, and other related impacts associated with heavy industrial construction, the respondents erred by neglecting to perform an EIS. Given the low threshold to prepare an EIS and the state's failure to do so, the court finds the respondent's decision is arbitrary and capricious. As such, the petition is hereby granted in its entirety. The issuance of the permits by respondents are hereby annulled. In addition, the negative declaration is hereby annulled. Respondents are permanently enjoined from proceeding with this project until it has complied with SECRA. The bond previously posted will remain in effect unless ordered otherwise. Respondents are hereby ordered to conduct and prepare an environmental impact statement concerning the affected areas of this project. Lastly, this court will retain jurisdiction over all matters concerning this project. Petitioners shall submit an order consistent with the memorandum decision for index numbers. Respondents shall submit an order consistent with this memorandum decision for index numbers. The parties of the remaining proceedings not otherwise disposed by this memorandum decision shall confer with the court on April 23rd, 2025 at 9:30. The Honorable Emilio Koliakivo. So yeah, that was the rendering decision. And you can hear there that essentially it's the victory that the East Side Parkways and I think a lot of residents of the city of Buffalo have been hoping for. And it was really, it was a good day, I think, for proponents of the project. For the judge to essentially completely agree with us that that the state did not do an EIS. I think he kind of laid it out there in layman terms of, right, regular developers, if they build a Tim Hortons, are required to do an environmental impact statement. So the idea that the state of New York, DOT, didn't have to do an EIS for a project that, is the largest construction project in this region's memory, perhaps since the actual Peace Bridge of the case law that was cited there. That was my biggest takeaway just watching the court hearings back when they were argued. I was just kind of blown away that the state DOT lawyer, he didn't have anything. There was no, lawyers, legalese. There's no spin and dance to try to get out of it. They really, I think the state DOT's argument essentially boiled down to, this is not a new construction. This is reconstruction. Therefore, we don't need an EIS. But it's big. So that's kind of right. We just read the thing, but I want to provide maybe a little context and analysis based on my perception. So I think something the East Side Parkways Coalition, we've been fighting essentially a legal battle now for a while. And I think this is the legal decision we were all hoping for and praying for, and we got it. And I think it's good, right? It gives us time. I think the state DOT is most definitely going to appeal. And also it wouldn't surprise me if they will start actually conducting the EIS, kind of maybe both those at the same time. Because I think, it was kind of obvious that they didn't do an EIS, and I think that's their thing. So it wouldn't surprise me if they've already kind of studied in the shadows, started to do an EIS. I think, let's start with the EIS. So why this is such a big victory for those of us that want the full restoration of Humboldt Parkway. And again, I think proponents, or it's kind of marketed as people that are opponents of this project. It's not that we want to see the highway remain. It's that we feel like this project we feel that the solution is full removal of the highway. And we don't think that covering up the highway, letting the highway remain there and just kind of putting a cap on it is going to fix anything. We want the full removal, which is kind of radical in the direction of, we think this project is, putting a Band-Aid on a scar when we need stitches and surgery. So let's start with the EIS. The EIS is going to require New York State conducted an environmental assessment. So this EIS is going to be a more robust research, more robust analysis on everything, all the environmental impacts. And it's one area where it's going to be, I think, good for the public, is it's going to require more robust public participation. So the EA or the environmental assessment really didn't require too much public participation, but you can bet that an EIS is going to demand that the public input, there just be more of it in this round. And I think that was something a lot of people, opponents complained, is that it didn't really take the public's opinion into view. And I think if you go back to the original project scoping documents, I think there was about 10 proposed, variations of the solution. And one of them was full removal and restoration of the parkway. And that was dismissed right at the end because it didn't fit with the project scope, right? As DOT, or the State Department of Transportation, is the lead agency on this project. And right, the DOT, pun intended, they have tunnel vision, right? So their vision is to maintain vehicular capacity, maintain vehicular capacity, maintain vehicular capacity. So they really, the whole idea that a project would remove a highway and do a parkway is just not in their scope. They're incapable of seeing that potential solution. And yeah, and I think that's what we want. I'm hoping the EIS will maybe be able to go back to the drawing board and get that, because essentially if you don't change that project scope in the very, very beginnings of this document, right in the roots of it, nothing else matters. Because if it can't, right, if it just dismisses that in its hand, and I think hopefully this EIS will give an opportunity for the public to speak out, and hopefully, I think it's apparent too, that demand the full restoration, just kind of like the city of Rochester and other cities have done. So that's big on the EIS front. I think the other reason this is essentially this doesn't get us full restoration, but it's a step in the right direction. So essentially, it buys us time, which is huge in the fact when you think that this is a construction project, and with inflation, right, the cost of construction is only going up. So the longer that this project is on pause, the longer and the more bloated the projected and actual costs are, which makes it more unlikely that it will move forward. And that's, I think, promising for full restoration, because from some of the studies that the Eastside Parkways has put out, actually filling in and removing the highway would be much cheaper than building this mile-long cap. And I think, right, this feels like a pivotal moment where fighting for the full restoration of Humboldt Parkway is pivoting from what we have here, which was a legal battle. And don't get me wrong, the legal battle is still ongoing. I think these cases are going to be appealed up to higher courts. There's still lawyers to fight, but this first legal battle was a victory. And really, what we're now pivoting into is kind of a public policy and a PR battle, which is the same, but this is also different than what we have here, which is a legal battle. And it just gives us more time, one, to build public support for full restoration. And with more public support just comes more pressure on politicians and those empowered to hopefully hear the demands of their constituents and maybe eventually support full restoration. I think that's one thing that needs more consideration, is kind of what is the off-ramp for, right, all these politicians that have been, gung-ho pushing this project forward. When you think of, Governor Kathy Hochul, New York State Assembly Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes, and many others, we need to give them an off-ramp. And I think that's part of this battle, is also, right, getting opponents to come to the side and move towards full restoration of Humboldt Parkways. That's another thing. It's kind of a pivotal moment where we're slowly pivoting from the legal battle to the battle for public relations, and really what is the public opinion on this, and we'll see. I think that's kind of where we are now, and it's a major victory for not just the Kensington Expressway and highway removal in the city of Buffalo, but also, right, again, that climate action lawsuit potentially has it can set precedent in New York State and maybe even nationally, internationally, for actually climate laws having some teeth. That's kind of the debrief. So thanks for sticking with me as we read through that lawsuit, and I'm glad we got to do that. I'm sure there'll be more, because there's plenty more to cover, but that was actual reading of the judge's lawsuits. So we got about 20 minutes here. Let's pivot to the Bray Miller market. So yeah, the Bray Miller market. For those of you that may not be familiar, essentially, the Bray Miller market is downtown next to the city of Buffalo or Erie County Public Library, and this was essentially, I guess it's easier to start at kind of going back, right? So where we are now, right now, the city of Buffalo is proposing to turn the old Bray Miller market into a new police B district headquarters, while they're a temporary headquarters for Buffalo Police District 2, while their current headquarters is reconstructed and has some construction work. So that's kind of like where we are now. So I think to understand that, let's backtrack a little to the beginning of what is Bray Miller market? Why does it matter? So essentially, the Bray Miller market was an economic development project from City Hall and from the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency. Essentially, their goal was to bring a downtown supermarket to, downtown Buffalo, because there is no real grocery store in the downtown. And I think, food deserts and areas that don't have access to healthy, fresh food it's a big issue in the cities. This is really the old administration, particularly Byron Brown, and City Halls. It really was a top-down economic development, and they put up RFPs. And they worked with a developer to actually build a building. They were able to secure the Bray Miller market to locate in that headquarters. So Bray Miller market is a market originally from the southern tier. I think it's Hamburg. And they, located down there. In the market, it's struggled, right? I know I went there several times when I used to work in City Hall and got goods. And I think the general consensus was that it just did not fit the neighborhood. So it was pretty pricey. It was not an Aldi's or a Save-A-Lot or like kind of a value store. It was more kind of like it was from Hamburg. It was kind of a boutique almost grocery store of, $8 pickles and, $9 mustards and just kind of very high-priced stuff. And I know even just some of my time there just trying to grab a sub, the service was not very good. It was just kind of like felt like a highbrow grocery store in downtown. And then obviously we had the pandemic, which, changed the whole, this grocery store was kind of built down there to help service, or it was thought that the downtown workforce would support the grocery store. And once the pandemic came, that brought the popularity of remote work. So you had lots of workers that live in the suburbs no longer were driving downtown. They were working from home. So just the whole foot traffic definitely played a part in that of, downtown is kind of a ghost town. So less foot traffic led to obviously decreased sale. And this led to kind of the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency stepped in. I think it was about a year ago. And the owner, Stuart Green, had requested over $500,000 in a forgivable loan to keep the store afloat and help support the store. And there were some debates in the council chambers and as well as Bureau of whether that was a good idea, especially when $500,000 could go to support a lot of other areas, especially other areas of the city that don't have fresh food. But eventually, the Common Council conceded in exchange for some business grants for their districts, but they ended up approving a over $500,000 loan. And then last December 2024, shortly after Byron Brown resigned, Bray Millers announced that they would also be closing, and that led to an almost immediate plan by the administration, the acting mayor, to turn the Bray Miller market into a new temporary police headquarters, while their current headquarters needs, I guess, some reconstruction work. So I think it's easiest to think of, the past, this really is Byron Brown's. This is just kind of a side effect of Byron Brown stepping aside, right? This was a failed initiative from the start. It was probably a failure the whole time. And once Byron Brown stepped aside, he was the one kind of keeping this project and keeping the owner happy. And this, the market closed a few months after that. So I think it's pretty easy to put together that this was kind of, it's it's the repercussions that we get, kind of a side effect of Byron Brown stepping aside, even though he's at OTB now. So that's kind of the past, which, right, we can blame Byron Brown, which is very true. We can blame Mayor Acting Scanlon, but we are where we are, and that's the current reality now is essentially the city is being asked to forgive the $500,000 loan to Stuart Green, and you'll see acting Mayor Scanlon at the closing press conference. He was pretty adamant that the loan was going to be forgiven because Bray Miller had hit its targets, which I think is true. They had hit some of their hiring targets. I know they were required to have like a marketing plan, a business plan, which clearly weren't helpful at all. But he really glosses over and overlooks one of the provisions for the loan was that the market had to stay open downtown for 2 years, and they only stayed open for a year. So in that regard of keeping the store open from 2 years, it's black and white. They failed to meet the obligations of the loan, and now the city does not need to forgive the loan. They can ask for the money back because the market did not stay open for 2 years. So that's black and white. What I think is going on here, and what my perception are, is that it was almost immediate, right? As soon as the market announced they were going to close, acting Mayor Scanlon said, we're going to forgive the loan because we don't think we should penalize Stuart Green and Bray Miller. And we've negotiated with them this deal where the Bray Miller building, the city's going to lease it for $1 a year or $1 per month and make it a temporary police headquarters while the B district is fixed. So it's kind of marketed as like this win-win of, okay, we're going to forgive the loan. We're going to get, a new headquarters for police. What I really think is going on here is I think acting Mayor Scanlon is kind of using his position as acting mayor to curry favors with the police union. So acting Mayor Scanlon, who he's recently announced that he's running for mayor, and we already saw he fired the City of Buffalo police commissioner shortly after touting about how good it was that violent crime was down. So he essentially fired the police commissioner out of a whim. The police commissioner was not very popular with the police union, so it was kind of seen as acting Mayor Scanlon doing a favor for the police union in the hope that the police union would then support him and will support him in the June primary. And I think that's kind of what's going on here. We have $500,000 at the table. We'll forgive that as long as you help use this building and let the city rent it for $1 for new police headquarters. So I think it's, again, kind of an example of him currying favors. And I could be wrong, but these are my perceptions. Helping the police union out because he wants to secure the police vote, and not just the police vote, but City Hall vote in the primary, which is, it's just the reality of what's going on here, I think. And especially, right, we're looking at a Democratic primary in June where maybe 30,000, 40,000 would be a really good turnout votes in the primary. And when you have, half a dozen to maybe a dozen candidates in the race, with such few voters, really having a City Hall voting block or a police block could swing it for a victory. Ultimately, there was a meeting downtown. Majority Leader of the Common Council, Leah Halton Pope, held a downtown meeting at the library where lots of tenants and residents almost unanimously came out in opposition to the idea to turn this Bray Miller Market into a police headquarters. Because essentially, right, the problem of healthy, fresh food downtown is still not solved. There's many people that live downtown that don't have access, immediate access to healthy foods in a grocery store. So it is a need. At least my perspective is that, right, and it's kind of this tricky situation. The city can't dictate to Bray Miller or Stewart's what to do, right? It's a privately owned business. We don't live in a dictatorship. This is not communist China. This isn't a one-party state or city, although sometimes it does feel that way. But the Common Council and the city cannot dictate what Bray Miller does with their private property. But they do have leverage, right? It's a negotiation. On one side, like Stuart Green and Bray Miller, they're leveraged that they own the building, right? And that if the city requires that the loan be paid back, Stuart Green can just declare bankruptcy, walk away from the building and not pay. And then you kind of have a situation where the bank would then, I believe, auction the building off, and then it could be anything at that point. So the city loses control, but then also the city has leverage, right? So we have over $500,000 on the table. You can think of that as a big poker chip, and the city, right? It's black and white. They don't need to forgive, but they could forgive it in exchange for something that benefits the city. So they could use that chip. Right now, they're kind of right. It just doesn't seem to me like, getting a temporary solution, right? And it's been marketed as a temporary headquarters for police, but it's kind of hard to believe that they would, rent this building, build it out for police headquarters, and then it wouldn't turn into some sort of permanent police building. So I think my concern is that, and my perspective is that if there's the $500,000 on the table, right, that's leverage the city has. And if the city is going to forgive that, we need to leverage that money to get the best deal for residents and for the city of Buffalo. And I think we could get a better deal than a temporary dollar a month lease for a police headquarters. It just feels like we could get more if the leadership's intention was to get the best deal for the city of Buffalo residents and taxpayers. If their motivation is to get the best deal for the police union so they can get votes in a primary, that outcome looks much different, and I think much closer to what you're actually seeing here, which is kind of turning the Bray Miller into a police station. I think one of the speakers at the public hearing actually brought up a really good idea or point of that the city actually owns an animal shelter a few blocks away from the current police headquarters. So kind of their question or idea was, why couldn't and has it been looked at of the police moving into and occupying the animal shelter? One, the animal shelter needs to be replaced and needs new. So I think there's a rumor that there might be a location in Niagara they'll be moving to. But the city already owns that building. Couldn't they just use that for a new police headquarters? And essentially the response from Bureau and the city was that this is immediate. This needs to happen now. The animal shelter is not built and not ready to be moved out and turned into a police station. But I think that's probably true, but also just probably also lacks the political will. I would think from the police perspective, the Bray Mill Market just, right, it's a brand new, fresh building, has a nice, glass front, expansive parking. It's much better than, some piss-soaked animal shelter that needs to be rehabbed. So I can imagine it's just shinier from the police angle. But it's interesting. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Then at the Bureau Loan Committee meeting, they essentially pushed off making a decision till March because they're doing more research, which I don't know what you have to research. Essentially, Stuart Green, it seems like, sent them some documents, so they have to assess his financial condition. Because essentially Stuart Green's leverage is, right, that he could declare bankruptcy, walk away from the building, default on the loan, and then essentially that building would go to the highest bidder, where at least now the city can maintain some control over potential future developments there. So that's kind of the high end. And I think the reason Bray Miller is so important, it feels like if I could encapsulate what the city of Buffalo currently is in one issue, it might be the Bray Miller Market. So I think the idea of, right, a top-down city hall vision for a downtown grocery store ends up being a complete failure, and then a developer walks away with $500,000 in exchange for police headquarters. The whole, right, turning a food market into a police station just feels very what the city of Buffalo actually is at this point, which is, a giant food desert with a bloated police budget, and where residents are often ignored, and food access is not prioritized because we have this endless, insatiable hunger to just keep feeding the police more budgets, more headquarters, more resources, and no one really seems to ever think, what's the actual ROI and how could we use, right? I think even too, it kind of seemed proposed at the public meeting of turning it into some sort of shared food store and police station, which I don't know how that's going to work. If you'll have the police headquarters in the back and then a food market in the front. But I do think there is maybe some potential, right? The police force, any solution to helping residents, it needs to include the police because the police have the largest budget line. So when we talk about city resources, I don't know, could you turn police into Uber drivers? Could Bray Millers be set up as some sort of, I don't know, dispr- distribution center for food, especially with the industrial and commercial like freezers and fridges in the back, and then could it turn into some where you actually police, logistics of actually dispersing food out to the community as Uber drivers? I don't know. I think maybe a little more radical, but yeah, we need to find a way to strengthen our food system, especially our local food system. I just worry with national and international supply chains. Strengthening our residents' ability to have fresh foods is really important. And I wonder if there's some sort of kumbaya moment between residents and police and food justice that could be had. I don't see it with the current administration, but I guess I'm always optimistic that maybe that could be a potential outcome. So that's kind of the high level Bray overview. So I wanted to, it's an important issue, and I think it's something I'm going to keep my eye on and do more reporting with. But yeah, it seems like an emerging issue in the city, especially with the chronic need for healthy food in the city, a chronic bloated police budget, and chronic just failures from City Hall leadership in having any sort of vision or ability to execute on any sort of downtown economic development. Because again, this is kind of eggs on the face of our mayor who has abandoned ship. This was his idea to kind of bring a grocery store, and it just was a failure. And then the whole, it was a failure to begin with. Then you had the pandemic, which did not help. And then essentially last year you had Stuart Green and Bray Millers coming and saying, admitting that this is a failed project, we need $500,000,000 to stay afloat. And there was debates there in the council, and they ended up giving them, and it kept the store open for another year. So it really was, lots of questionable decisions on so many levels, and it's disappointing for sure. So we got 3 minutes here. Let's see. Let's do. I think maybe I'll do a little Buffalo Bills analysis. So I think obviously yesterday was the Super Bowl, and yeah, it was as a Bills fan, watching the Eagles destroy the Chiefs. Right, it was a very impressive victory. I guess a couple thoughts. I don't know. I don't know if the Bills would have won. Obviously, the Eagles looked like a pretty stacked and loaded team yesterday. I do like to think that they maybe would have put up a better fight and had it be more competitive. But I think a couple takeaways we can take away from that game. Just the Eagles roster. It just seems I think it was pretty apparent that they're just loaded all over the board, and it was just crazy. I think Mahomes and Andy Reid are the best kind of head coach, even Spagnuolo, head coach, defensive coordinator, quarterback trio, right? It was just crazy how, the Eagles clearly had a superior roster, and how, all their coaching really didn't matter when it was, they just had no answer for the players and just the depth that the Eagles had. The Eagles, they had a first-year offensive and defensive coordinator, and it didn't matter because they just had, and I don't even know if Sirianni, obviously he's a good coach, but was he tactically better than Reid? Was he? I don't know. I don't think so. So it to me was eye-opening what a difference the roster really makes, and especially when you get to the highest level of the Super Bowl. The Chiefs, we knew going into even the Bills game, we knew that their offensive line had some holes and weaknesses that we could exploit, and the Bills were unable to do that, and the Eagles just were able to expose it. And I think it shows when you get to the big game, the Super Bowl, you need to be solid across the board. You can't have any weaknesses. And not only do you have to be solid, you have to have game wreckers, game changers at all levels of your team, which the Eagles did. And I think, at least from Bill's perspective, I think the Eagles, it's the formula of how to win a Super Bowl, right? Going back to the Buccaneers a few years ago, I think even some of the Giants teams in the 2010s if you can get pressure with four guys and drop everybody else into coverage, that's the formula for defense, is generate pressure with four and drop everyone back into coverage. And if you can do that, you have a very good shot of making, Brady struggled under pressure. Mahomes looked worse than pedestrian yesterday. And I think, if anything, I'm optimistic because I think the Bills, our defensive philosophy and scheme, right? I think that's what McDermott tries to do is drop back into zone, play a soft shell. The inability that we've not had is we have not been able to figure out our defensive line. We haven't been able to generate pressure with 4. And I think it just brings into focus just our roster. It's just not good enough at the highest level. I mean, more game changers, more records. And I think it just makes, I think, fixing the defensive line and maybe bringing in a game wrecker like a Myles Garrett, right? You bring in a game wrecker and it just makes everyone else's job easier. And I think that's kind of my big takeaway was just the masterclass that Howie Roseman, the general manager of the Eagles, put on with his drafting, development, ability to acquire talent in free agency, and just I'm hoping that the Bills can follow suit because I think that's what we need to do is just put more pieces around Josh and build out our defense. So we'll see. That was an Austin audit. I appreciate you tuning in, and until future shows, I'm signing out.